One more quick and dirty video for you this afternoon before I head to town to go get my kids. This is an article that's in the Atlantic called Russia is Losing the War of Attrition. Hit like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. Please keep coming on back. Just watching the videos and sitting through those ads or being a YouTube premium member and watching these videos, put some money into my pocket. You can also hit the thanks button or become a channel member. Join me on Patreon there. Support independent Canadian YouTubers. Okay, Russia is losing the war of attrition. I got a little disagreement to start here. Russia is not on the verge of collapse. That makes the Trump administration's decisions particularly short-sighted and tragic. My issue with that statement is that the Trump administration's decisions are not particularly short-sighted and tragic, at least not in the way that they're insinuating. I think the whole point here actually is that Russia is losing the war, that Russia is not in a good position. I mean, they've been feeding even North Koreans into the meat grinder. You can go and look it up on any military channel on YouTube. You can look up the videos of drone strikes on North Korean soldiers just getting hammered out there. So we got Russia with the aid of North Korea, who North Koreans are in Europe right now, or at least have been. I'm not sure what the status is this month of those forces, right? So Trump's saying Ukraine has no cards. Well, Russia has many, and that's, partly true. I'm always hesitant when people say Russia's on the verge of collapse, because you look at the history and it's like, well, Russia's collapsed many times and just got right back up and kept going. They collapsed in World War I. They collapsed through forced measures with 5-year plans, forcing starvation onto people in Ukraine for farming projects that served. They sold the grain to the West, basically, to fund the Stalinist revolution there, right? Horrible, horrible times that happened in Russia at that time. Then Russia, Stalin kills all his generals. Then the Nazis do the unthinkable to the Russians. They attack. The Russians basically lose a war with Finland before all that happens and show how weak they are. Germany comes in, gets almost to the gates of Moscow, is right there within artillery range. Several big pushes happen. The Germans are finally defeated. Russia takes over half of Europe. Russia engages in the Cold War with the West then for the next so many years. In 1989, the Warsaw Pact folds as it is, and the Soviet Union collapses fully in 1991. Okay, so every time we think that we thought they were collapsed in 1991, here they are back again, right? So I'm always hesitant when someone says Russia is about to collapse. I mean, there's lots of evidence for why that should be the case. I just don't know if this is a country that easily can be beaten. These are a miserable people who endure suffering like no one else on earth, with a stone cold face and a drink of vodka. So, as military historians, so saith the writers, if you didn't catch that, Philip Payson O'Brien and Elliot A. Cohen, we think this is misreading not only what is happening on the ground, but how wars unfold, and in particular, of the difference between attritional campaigns and those built on maneuver. The Luftwaffe and German submarine force during World War II, to take just two examples, were defeated not by a single blow, but by a technologically advanced, tactically and operationally sophisticated approach that rendered those organizations, large as they were, unable to function effectively. That's part true, but I mean, manpower was also part of that too. The Germans were outmanned on all fronts, so it took less effort to defeat them on the Western Front than maybe it should have, but they were strategically and effectively outmanned nonetheless, once the invasion of France went underway in 1944. Back to the article here. Okay, so in the same vein, the German army's advances in the spring of 1918 concealed the underlying weakness in that military produced by attrition, which ultimately doomed the Kaiser's army and the regime for which it fought. So we've been here before. Prior to the war, the intelligence community, political leaders, and many students of Russian military concluded that Russia would easily overrun Ukraine militarily. Kiev would fall in a few days, and Ukraine itself could be conquered in weeks. As you know, Kiev never fell. We should consider that failure as we assess the certainty of Vance and those who think like him. Wars are rarely won so decisively because attrition is not only a condition of war, but a strategic choice. Smaller powers, through the intelligent application of attrition, succeed in advancing their own goals. Even Even Vietnam, we saw this, right? It was a war of attrition, even though the numbers favored the American forces in terms of casualties caused and deaths caused. They never succeeded in fundamentally stopping the insurgency. So, in particular, true. If Ukraine, if they can exploit technological change and get the most from outside support and allies, this could be true as well. So, Vietnam was outgunned by the United States, the American colonies. I haven't read this article fully through, and it's funny they went right to Vietnam. I kind of skimmed through quickly and didn't realize they would even mention it. But so you can see the parallels are all there in history, as always. If you know history, you know the future, or at least what's the wide range of things that are most likely. Iranian forces outnumbered those of Iraq during a long and brutal war in the 1980s, but they nonetheless lost. So the pessimistic analysis has not paid nearly enough attention to the weak underpinnings of the Russian military power. Russia's economy is often noted as struggling with interest rates that top 20% amid soaring inflation, with manpower shortages made critical by the war. Its condition is dire, as one study noted, partly because the military budget amounts to 40% of all public spending, partly because oil revenue is taking a hit from lower prices, Ukrainian attacks, and tightening sanctions. Russia's weakness is particularly visible in the army. One report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated that in 2024 alone, the Russians lost 1,400 main battle tanks and more than 3,700 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. At the same time, Russian production of such vehicles, included refurbished units, totaled just 4,300, not enough to make up the losses. In desperation, Russia turned to restoring its oldest and least effective combat vehicles, many of Soviet-era vintage. One study by Chatham House asserts that the Russian military-industrial complex is ill-adapted to deal with the effects of a prolonged war against Ukraine or to achieve sustainable future in terms of production, innovation, and development. This holds true for Russian manpower. The number of soldiers that the Russians were able to maintain at the front seemed to peak in the spring and summer of 2024, above 650,000. By the end of the year, it was closer to 600,000, despite extraordinary bonuses the Russian government offered new recruits, amounting to about 2.5 times the average Russian salary in 2023. So it's a bleak economy. People are desperate there. An easy way to get yourself out of that is to join the Russian military, and people still aren't running in droves to do it. So the Russian public, I think, is at large not terribly interested in this war. Nonetheless, it persists and carry on. And you could say the same thing true now of American foreign policy. It doesn't reflect the vast majority of what the American people want. They want our alliances and strategic objectives to be held together, as have been the past 80 years has been the case. So, Russian casualties mounted steadily. According to the British Ministry of Defense in 2022, they were 500 a day. In December 2023, a year later, at just under 1,000. In December 2024, a year after that, more than 1,500 a day. In 2024, Russia suffered 430,000 killed and wounded compared to just over 250,000 in 2023. That's unbelievable. North Korean reinforcements have attracted attention in the press, but these troops, numbering in the tens of thousands at most, cannot make up for the fundamental deficiencies in Russian manpower. Moreover, the high rates of attrition the Russians have suffered, roughly the same number of personnel mobilized each year, mean that the Russian military has not been able to reconstitute. It is more and more a primitive force, poorly trained and led, driven forward by fear. The pause in American aid last year hurt Ukraine. Now, however, the stockpiles seem to be in better shape for most types of weaponry. Ukraine's own production has reached impressive levels in certain vital categories, particularly but not exclusively unmanned aerial vehicles. In 2024, the Ukrainian military received 1.2 million different Ukrainian-produced UAVs, 2 orders of magnitude more than Ukraine possessed, let alone produced at the beginning of the war. Ukrainian production rates are still rising. It aims to produce 4 million drones this year alone. 4 million drones. Now, these UAVs are critical because they replaced artillery as the most effective system on the field of battle. By one estimate, the UAVs now cause 70% of Russian losses. That's crazy. Ukraine's robust defense industry is innovating more quickly and effectively than that of the Russian allies. These are strategies Canada needs to look towards. Become a world leader in drone technology, I think, is something we need to consider if, in fact, it comes to ever a shooting annexation it remains to be seen yet whether the American public will ever stomach or, an unjustified attempt to take our sovereignty in Canada, unless we have to consider this as a legitimate threat. We have to. That's what you have to do. When someone threatens you, you have to take it. Even in real life, even in the bar, when someone says, I'll kill you, I look at them differently and say, nothing. Ukrainian air defenses, however, have been remarkably successful in neutralizing large majority of attacks that Russians have had on Ukrainian industry and civilian targets and energy infrastructure. These bombings have increased today, and Trump is trying to say that, well, that's what shows that Russia wants peace, that they're bombing even more than ever right now. That's up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left, like the big lies, right? Ukrainian civilian casualties have been decreasing. Ukraine, moreover, has been on the offensive as well. It produced some 6,000 longer-range heavy UAVs, which it's used to attack deep into Russia, decreasing Russian oil production. Remarkably, these attacks on Russian oil output industries, man, they're legitimate. They're legitimate acts during a war. The fact that the war doesn't have to all be on Ukrainian soil. I mean, you attack us, what do you expect? Remarkably, Ukraine appears to be matching the rate at which Russia is producing its own similar drones, the Shahed, which is being built on license from Iran. Shahed. Despite American reluctance to provide further aid, Ukraine's European friends can make up a difference, even though they can't simply replace what the U.S. has been providing. Of course, suddenly European defense spending has just gone through the roof in a matter of days. They don't, for instance, make the Advanced Patriot anti-missile system. So that's something the Ukrainians could certainly deal with having more of. Although they have other air-capable defense weapons, Europe can help Ukraine press ahead with more UAV production. Europeans have the capacity to manufacture engines for long-range UAVs at a far higher rate. Anyways, some European systems not yet provided, such as a General Taurus cruise missile, could increase Ukraine's advantages. Germany has so far denied Ukraine the Taurus, a far more effective system with greater range and a heavier payload than the Franco-British Storm Shadow Scalp missile. The new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has already said he would send Taurus missiles to Ukraine if the Russians did not relent. With these systems, Ukraine could add to the considerable damage it's already done towards Russia. Additional campaigns depend on industrial base. The European Union alone has a GDP of 10 times that of Russia. If you add the UK and Norway to that calculation, the imbalance favors Ukraine. It grows even larger. As it is, Europe and the United States have provided Ukraine with roughly equal amounts of military resources, 30% each, while Ukraine has produced 40% of its own. The U.S. has provided more than just military material. It's furnished intelligence and access to Starlink internet access has been a big thing, right? None of this can quickly be made up. Although one should not underestimate the depth of technological intelligence resources available from Europe and sympathetic Asian countries, should they mobilize. The United States has stinted its aid until now, but Ukraine itself and its European allies are filling the gap. Ukraine is not on the verge of collapse. It's Russia, not Ukraine. It's losing the attritional war, which makes the Trump administration's decisions particularly short-sighted and tragic. Again, I think these are purposeful. I think this is an attempt to try to rebalance what's a losing cause right now for Trump's main ally, Vladimir Putin. Ukraine has plenty of cards, even if Trump and Vance can't see them. If America's leaders could only bring themselves to put pressure on Russia comparable to what they put on Ukraine, they could help Ukraine achieve something much more like a win. So, there you go. Excellent article today in The Atlantic. Brand new article. You can go read it for yourself. But I think The Atlantic's one of those things where you only get so many free articles a month or whatever, right? So that might have meant that the only place you're going to see this was here. And the fact that we can't share news in print in Canada means on Facebook means I got to find other ways to kind of start getting the message out there more and more. Hit like, share, subscribe, everybody. We'll be back with you with some more weather videos and whatnot here. Next on the channel, I got to go to town now and get the kids, though. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.